we certainly haven't ignored what happened on January 6th. And obviously, closer to it, we gave it sufficient coverage, and we talk about, different people have been sent away. There's been a lot of people have been sent to jail at this point for storming the Capitol. But it has been very hard and I don't know that you ever really know if it's not successful, or at least in part successful. If you ever really know in these situations how close we were to literally having a coup. And,
there was at least a coup plan.
Well, that's the thing, is that it's also been obscured as just how serious the plan is, right? There was a lot of people who early on, from the far right, the right, and the sort of formally associated with the left, who came out and poo-pooed this whole thing. And you'll hear people today go like, how can you charge Donald Trump with a crime and not charge other presidents with crimes? I think the idea that Barack Obama essentially got the OLC to allow for him to assassinate Americans without a trial. George Bush, the Iraq War, and torture. We could go on and on. And there's no doubt in my mind that we should have held to account past presidents for those things and more. Iran-Contra, Watergate. These were all very problematic. And the Keating 7, the savings and loan crisis. There's been a lot of things that we have failed to really fully hold people to account. But because we have done that is not an argument that we should not hold Donald Trump to account.
Exactly.
In fact, it's got it flipped. The holding Trump to account, which is obviously, I think, easier for our society than it was to hold these other past presidents to account, should be leveraged to hold future presidents to account. And with that said, what Donald Trump had to do was pretty unique and really struck at the fundamental sort of, I think there's a very strong argument that we don't live in a real democracy, in the sense that, money and power has squeezed out the ability of the average person's sort of desires to be implemented by its government. But one of the primary mechanisms we have, at least to register our dissent, obviously we can protest, but one of the key mechanisms we have to make change in this country, not revolutionary change, but the kind of incremental change that, frankly, for better or for worse, most Americans want, is by voting and by a peaceful transition of power. Mm-hmm. And this is what it spoke to. And I want to read this. I read this the other day, but it really is important to understand just where we got. It's been reported by the committee that looked at January 6th that Donald Trump had appointed Jeffrey Clark, DOJ, acting head of DOJ, for a short period of time, and reversed himself because there was a series of threats of mass resignations.
And this was after Bill Barr resigned, and then someone else, I'm forgetting his name, resigned, right? Before this was the third.
Not before somebody resigned. Bill Barr resigned, and then there was the acting. It was his name escapes
Jeff
me.
Rosen.
Jeff Rosen.
Yeah. Jeff Rosen.
Right.
Was acting DOJ, and wait a second. Jeff Rosen, who was the guy that was the fourth quote conspirator? Now I'm confused.
That's Jeffrey Clark.
Jeff Clark, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So Jeff Rosen is the acting, and he was going to be replaced with Jeff Clark because Rosen wouldn't go along with Donald Trump's plans. And this is in the this is in the indictment. On the afternoon of January 3rd, co-conspirator 4, that is Clark, spoke with a deputy White House counsel. I think that White House counsel has been identified. I don't have his name.
Patrick Philbin is his name.
Philbin.
Yeah.
The previous month, Philbin had informed the defendant, that was Trump, that there is no world, there is no option in which you do not leave the White House on January 10th. In other words, you
20th.
Lost the election. January 20th. You lost the election. You need to leave.
Yep.
Now the same deputy White House counsel, Philbin, tried to dissuade Jeffrey Clark from assuming the role of acting attorney general. Philbin, and I'm filling in the names here. It says deputy White House counsel and it says co-conspirator 4, but we know who those people are now. Reiterated to Clark that there had not been outcome determinative fraud in the election. In other words, maybe there was fraud in the election, maybe there wasn't, but certainly nothing that was going to change the outcome. Because you can always find 1 or 2 cases of fraud across, 240, 250 million people voting, or I should say 120 million people vote, whatever the number is at any given election on either side. But it's non-determinative, non-outcome determinative fraud in the election. And that if the defendant, Trump, remained in office nonetheless, there would be riots in every major city in the United States. Clark responded, well, Philbin, that's why there's an Insurrection Act. And we had heard a lot of talk of Trump doing this. I mean, so there was there was a plan.
We should explain to people, though, what the Insurrection Act entails, because I don't know if it's necessarily clear just right from the indictment. What that means is that they would deploy troops on U.S. soil to protect, in the way that the Insurrection Act is constructed, to protect the rightful U.S. president from an insurrection, and that would be to quell it. That is what they were planning on doing. So in response to, or at least floating or considering. So in response to the White House counsel saying, Deputy White House counsel Philbin saying that there would be riots in response to Trump remaining in power illegally, he's saying we would use the military to crush protests.
That's what we got the military for.
And then, but yeah, Trump, he just didn't know what he was doing. He just didn't,
I'm just doing my free speech.
He's just shooting from the hip, right?
And keep in mind, there's obviously a conspiracy afoot, because the Insurrection Act, it's not just the use of the Insurrection Act, right? It's everything that would need to have been done to require them to use the Insurrection Act. And that's what Clark was going to participate in as well. Clark was going to participate in finding the fake, the finding that the real electors were illegitimate, finding that there was fraud in Georgia and there was fraud in Michigan and there was fraud in Philadelphia, et cetera, et cetera. That was the plan. As far as the military deciding that they were going to participate in that plan, this is from Carol Leonnig and Philip Rucker's book, I Alone Can Fix It, Donald Trump's Catastrophic Final Year. On January 6th, a mob of Trump supporters, many of whom had gathered for the president's fiery speech outside the White House, invaded the Capitol, vandalizing the halls of government and forcing a joint session of Congress into hiding. After the deadly invasion, Milley, this is the former chief of staff, stressed that come hell or high water, there will be a peaceful transfer of power on January 20th, one senior official said in the book. We've got an aircraft. Our landing gear is stuck. We've got one engine and we're out of fuel. We've got to land this bad boy. I don't know why all these military people have to talk like they're in a movie.
Well,
Milley, a bad movie. Leading a January 14th military drill in advance of Biden's inauguration, reportedly said, here's the deal, guys. These guys are Nazis. They're Boogaloo boys. They're Proud Boys. These are the same people we fought in World War II. Everyone in this room, whether you're a cop or whether you're a soldier, we're going to stop these guys to make sure we have a peaceful transfer of power. We're going to put a ring of steel around this city and the Nazis aren't getting in. And earlier, apparently, in regard to January 6th, they may try but they're not going to effing succeed, Milley said of a possible government takeover in conversation with his closest deputies, according to the book. You can't do this without the military. You can't do it without the CIA and the FBI. We're the guys with the guns, he said. The general, having listened to Trump spread an array of baseless conspiracy theories and false claims of fraud throughout the final weeks of his term, had drawn parallels with the rise of Nazism in the 20th century Germany. The book said, this is a Reichstag moment, Milley told aides in early January, according to the book, the gospel of the Fuhrer. So it's not hard to imagine that had Trump picked a different, Joint Chiefs of Staff, if Mike Pence had been able to be convinced by Jack Eastman, who he certainly was hoping to be convinced. Again, you don't keep it's been reported many times. Pence had Eastman in his office for 6 hours?
Yeah.
A couple of days before the thing. You don't do that unless you're asking for someone to convince me how this is going to work. Because
it's in his interest. They say that in the indictment. Of course, it's in Pence's interest to remain in power.
It was, but he was clearly looking for a way to do this. And when it was clear that he couldn't do it without being on the hot seat, then I think he chickened out. I mean, I think that's why Trump basically called him reportedly the P word, as it were.
It's a risk-benefit analysis, and
Yep.
Trump had given them Supreme Courts. He'd given them enough, and it's like, you know what? Hey, the alarm's been ringing. Maybe we should make our getaway now.